Welcome back to Before Da Phame podcast. This is your host, Jordan. And today we have the 40th episode of this podcast. This right here is really a dream come true. We started this a little bit over 6 months ago, and here we are on episode 40. And we really had more than 40, but this time around I had to do a little bit of adjusting with my account. So now we officially are at 40, and I just want to take this time out to thank God for waking us up this morning, getting us home safely throughout this week. It's been a bit chaotic, with FIFA going on. We've had concerts going on. We just had a lot of things going on in Atlanta. And today is July 4th. So happy 4th to everybody who celebrates it. And all of my soldiers out there, man, shout out to you. If you are in active duty, or even if you're not on active duty right now, I salute you. I appreciate all the services that you provide for our country, and you are part of the reason why we are free today. And I just want to say thank you for everything that you do for us. So today's episode is going to be about rebranding or staying stuck, right? And now, why are we channeling this energy right now? Well, why not right now? This is one of the days that is important for this country, for many, many reasons. But when you look back into the history of July 4th, right? Where it all started. It all is highlighted in the national anthem, right? Where we're talking about the rockets that, went off, and the red glare and all of that stuff. It sounds so patriotic. It sounds so inspirational. But when you look deeper into the lyrics, it's very violent, right? It's a lot of things going on, and it's a signal for independence, right? But it's also a means to an end on death, a means to an end on dictatorship, a means to an end on just a lot of different things that were going on in the United States, that we had to rebrand it, right? We had to take away from the negative sides of what went on before this day to make it into where we can celebrate our independence. We can celebrate just being free, right? And you would think that freedom is one of those things that when you talk about it, when you get into it, it's happy, right? You should be happy to be free. But there was a lot of people who had to deal with the loss, right? They had to deal with losing their homes. They had to deal with losing family members. They had to deal with losing children. They had to deal with all of these things that bring grief, that bring anguish, that brings tough times on the people who had to survive this. And for me, my family, I had a few war veterans, I had a few army men, and watching them live in the United States after their service, it was very heartbreaking. Like, it was heartbreaking because not only did they have to depend on, services from the VA, or, they had to depend on the benefits and all of that stuff, but they had to depend on family members who couldn't understand what it took to rebrand themselves, right? And some of them were able to do this successfully. Some of them weren't able to let go of what happened. And this is what I mean when I say you can stay stuck in a certain time frame, a certain identity, and that's all fine for people who claim that, right? If you claim that identity, if you own it, hey, don't let anything that I say stop you, right? But if you're like me and you had a challenging upbringing, you had times where you had to depend on yourself, you had to depend on what you had at the time, and it's hard for you to step out of that independence, now is the time to rebrand. Now is the time to redefine these things in order for you to break free, like, and I mean true freedom. So before we get into it, I want to start out with my story of my challenges and being stuck, being, I would say, caught up in a past of pain and just unhealthy boundaries, unhealthy relationships. I talked about my relationships before, but now when we get into that part of being stuck, I think back to my most recent times of being homeless, right? And this was for roughly 2.5 years, almost 3 years. 2017, I was evicted from my home, and this home had been known to me for about 4 years, almost. Well, actually 5 years, if you want to count that last year. But that last year for me, it wasn't really a year to live at home. Like, I was more so out of my home than I was at home. So that's why I don't necessarily count that last year. But 4 to 5 years in this home, and for me, this was the first time that I had experienced the eviction of this magnitude, right? This was the first home that was purchased and owned by a Ellison, and I say this because we have other properties that, is in my family name, but how it was purchased is what I mean. Like, this was bought outright, and the only thing that we had to do was keep up with the taxes and, upkeep the home, all of that stuff. So this situation was different. It was unique. This was all credit to my mother and what she went through in the last years of her life. So to go through this experience of eviction, it molded me. It shaped me into the man that I am today, or it helped shape me. I wouldn't say it completely shaped me, but it made me think about how living with other people was all that I knew, right? I grew up with my cousins. I grew up around my aunts, my uncles, various people in my family that were looked at as my village, right? But in this one time of difficulty and need, I felt stuck, right? I felt like I didn't know who to call. I didn't know how I was going to start my life over again. And watching my stuff being put out on the lawn, it was very embarrassing, even though people weren't necessarily watching or anything like that. It still was embarrassing to have to come home to that, or to have someone knock on your door and tell you that you have to leave. So for me, in that time, I was lost. I felt betrayed. I felt all the things that you could feel on your worst day, right? And from that moment, I knew that, my life would not be the same, but I didn't know how different it would be, right? I didn't know how many changes would come from that one moment, right? And it started really months before that. If you know about the eviction process, you know that you have to be served, right? People have to give you a notice before they can just come in and take your stuff out. So this lady that came to our door, she was giving us notices. We just didn't know it, right? Our aunt was not giving us the full details and being honest with us on this process. So to figure out that this had started months before that, I was very surprised, but I'm also not surprised because of what was going on in the house. So fast forward to the middle of 2017, it's my birthday time, and it was one of those days where it was hot outside, like July is always in Georgia. And I went to go get a haircut, right? Now, I usually get haircuts before my birthday, but this time around, I don't know why I waited till the day of my birthday to go get a haircut. Actually, it's probably because I was going through a lot. I didn't have the funds at the time, but on this particular day, I went to go get a haircut. My brother and I, we were planning on selling some things from the house in our old house. We were going to sell some things to get some cash so we can do some things later on that day. And one of the things that we were selling was a TV, right? We were selling one of the TVs that we weren't using around the house. It was just taking up space. So we had this TV in our room and I went to go get a haircut. My brother went with me. And on the way back, my grandmother had called us. She called both of us. She was trying to figure out where this television was. And for me, I'm just like, why are we concerned with a television, right? That should have been the least of her concerns. But she called freaking out. She thought that things were being stolen, and we had to reassure her that no, it was not stolen. We were going to sell it or take it to the pawn shop, right? And in that moment, my grandmother flipped, right? She flipped from a person who was kind enough to let us in her home, kind enough to, take us in, to a person who was calling the police on us, right? And in this moment, I knew that, again, this was another moment in my life where things were not going to be the same, right? With my family, with my relationships with her, my aunt, who, not my aunt that I was living with, but this aunt is the youngest aunt. She lived literally across the street. So when my grandmother called her over, it wasn't much she had to do. She just came right over. And in this moment, I'm coming back from the barbershop, right? So just imagine a probably mile and a half walk, maybe a little bit over that, almost 2 miles walk in 90-degree weather in Georgia after a haircut. That's all I'm gonna say. It was excruciating pain on me to have to go through that, walk through that, because my grandmother was supposed to be picking us up. She was supposed to come get us. But in that moment, when she realized that TV was not there, she told us, oh, y'all can leave, right? So we had to walk from the barbershop to the house. And by the time we got to the house, there were two policemen standing outside. They were coming to investigate not investigate, but they were coming to see what was going on. And we had to explain to them that nobody's stealing anything. This was technically our property, right? We are the beneficiaries. And for them to call the police on us, it was just, I mean, I can't really say that I'm surprised, right? I'm not surprised that this happened, but this was part of the shift, right? So from those moments of feeling stuck, not knowing what to do, this is what charged me into being a man who, I'm not going to let people and their feelings stop me from doing what I need to do, right? I'm not going to hold on to things from a past relationship, a past home that I know it was weighing me down. I was not going to be able to take that with me on my journey. And that's one of the points that I want to make to you guys. When you are on this journey of life, right, you're going to have a lot of things that you want to hold on to, right? You've seen the show Hoarders, of how people hold on to things for decades. They hold on to it for decades. And I didn't want to be that person, right? I didn't want to be the person who can't let go and I have this stuff that's just taking up my space, right? I didn't even have a space to keep it, right? And also, one thing that I did want to know too, my aunt, she put some of, or not some of, she put a lot of our stuff in the storage unit, right? After the eviction, she had a storage unit for herself and she had a storage unit for us that most of my stuff went into: shoes, clothes, bedding, all the stuff that I couldn't carry, basically. And the storage unit was auctioned off after non-payments, of course, and we didn't know about this, right? Me and my brother, we had to literally get them to open up the storage unit that was left, which we thought was our storage unit, but instead it was her storage unit. So she had our stuff auctioned off. Her stuff was still in there. So I'm just like, okay, so you just allowed our stuff to just get tossed away. So just imagine memories, my brother's memories, my younger brother, that is, who passed away prematurely. His stuff was lost. My mother's stuff lost. Everything that I could say in memory of my mother's outside of pictures. I have a few pictures, but that was because of family friends. But all the things that I had of her was gone. So by this time, again, I was ready to leave. I was already ready to be on my way. And this was also a part of the rebrand too, because at this point in time, I told myself that I wanted to start driving. I wanted to be a truck driver. And I had an uncle at the time who was driving trucks. He gave me my first experience behind the wheel of a truck. And this wasn't just box truck or anything. This was an actual 18-wheeler. And I got to drive it on the highway. I experienced my first accident, or not in the truck. I saw an accident. I don't want to get that misconstrued. I saw my first accident while driving on I-20, and it was just like a movie. Like, it happened so quickly, and he was just like, "Yep, you're going to see a lot of that." And I was like, "Wow, that was very quickly." So I got my first experience behind the wheel, and it was just one of those times where I was trying to soak up all the game that I could, and I did, right? So by this time, he wasn't there, right? On this day of my birthday, my grandmother called the police. Eventually, the police had to leave because they had no evidence of us stealing anything. They had no evidence of us doing anything out of the law, right? And my grandmother, of course, was upset. She was upset. She was really upset about this television. It's not your television. So I didn't understand why she was upset. I didn't understand why my youngest aunt was upset. But in this moment, we had to call a friend up. She came and picked us up, and we went to the pawn shop. We were successful in selling it. And I had a good birthday night. But now, from this moment on, it was like I knew that I couldn't stay stuck in that, right? In that house with my grandmother, my oldest aunt, her children. That moment right there, I felt like if I were to stay there, I would have gone downhill. I would have really lost it. I probably would have done some things to hurt myself, and I didn't want to do that, right? I've been through that time before, and it wasn't a pretty sight. So me leaving that environment, going into my first couple of times of being in hotels, right? Me and my brother, we were living in hotels for months, right? We had this one hotel that was in, I think, Rex, Georgia. Yes, Rex, Georgia, that we started at. We had to move to another hotel that was, and I say hotel, I really mean motel. It wasn't really a high end motel, but that's what we could afford at the time. And, we were coming off of, like I said, just an eviction, losing our stuff, losing all of this stuff. So you can imagine the pain that we were carrying, the stuff that we didn't want to deal with, but we had to, right? We had to deal with that. And living in these motels, it kind of gave us that time to reflect. And this is my second point that I'm going to make. When you're going through your rebrand, when you're going through your time of isolation, or maybe you're not in the space to isolate, but if you have time to reflect, it's very important that you do that. It's very important that you hold yourself accountable for the mistakes that you made or the decisions that you made that led to you being in the position that you're in, so that when you get to that point where you're ready to decide, you're not making this based off your current emotion, right? Because your emotion is going to change, right? You're going to feel happy about it. You're going to feel sad about it. You're going to feel upset about it. All of these things are going to be a part of that journey, but you have to reflect over it so you can make the right decision. And this again led to us coming from motels. Then we started staying in Airbnbs. We stayed with a few friends. And that time right there also felt like we were stuck, right? We were stuck in that pattern of not knowing where we were going, not knowing if we were going to get food that day, not knowing if we were going to be okay, right? And that is a part of life too, right? You're going to have those moments where you don't know what's coming next, but you got to keep going. You got to keep moving. And that's what we did, right? We kept moving until we got to our friend Brandon, right? And we talk about him a lot. We're going to keep talking about him because he's very pivotal to this rebrand, right? He was the person that first, like, I kid you not, we called Brandon before we even called a family member. And of course, Brandon was doing something at the time, so he couldn't come help us, but he did send us funds to basically get us into a situation. And that's why whenever I talk about him, it's more so in the light of how he transformed or helped transform not only our lives, but he transformed his own life. And his rebrand is something we could talk about too, but we're just talking about me today. And this whole time period, like I said, we were just going back and forth between staying with friends, staying on our own. And it didn't come until 2020 of our chances of like getting ourselves together. And this was during COVID time that we had this very, very special time to be at home. We were still, able to keep the bills paid, all of the things that, we were wondering about before. It was one of those times we didn't have to wonder about it. And that's a different feeling for me because we were so used to getting up at 5 a.m, going to work a temp job, not knowing if we were going to get sent out that day. And this was the one time in my life where I didn't have to worry. I didn't have to wonder if the lights were going to get cut off or food was not going to be in the house. That was very pivotal to me because in that time frame, I had a lot on my plate, but I didn't have to shift anything in my life. Like, this was the time where I had more time to reflect. I had more time to think about how I wanted my life to go. And this is also the time where Brandon and we were recording, we were doing our thing, we were making beats, we were in that mode of creation, right? And this where another shift in my rebrand came, because I realized that music was a passion of mine, right? Growing up, being in the band, being around all the musical talents in my family, I realized that music was a passion of mine, but it wasn't my business, right? And that's something that a lot of people aren't honest with themselves about, right? Like, you can be a fan of music, you can be talented, you could be passionate about it. But if it's not your business, then it's going to be very tough for you to navigate in that industry, right? Because it is a business, right? You can be, like I said, the most talented at what you do, but if you don't have business sense, if you don't have good lawyers, if you don't have all the things that make a business go, then you're going to struggle, right? And I didn't want to come from off the streets of struggling, not knowing where my next meal was coming from, to navigate that in the studio and all of that. Like, it's a rough life. And for me, it became bigger than music, right? This creation of who I am and what I wanted to get out into the world, it became bigger than me just making a record and wanting to do hits. Like, so that's when a day of reflection with my brother Brandon, I told him how I wanted the next 5 years of my life to go, right? I told him that although I still wanted to create music and all of that stuff, I wanted it to be bigger than that. I wanted it to reflect my story of how the pain and all the things that we went through, it wasn't in vain, right? It wasn't just something to go and create a song about. And while I did create some songs, I did have memories of that. My memories in that also came with nights with him, or nights with my friend Josiah, nights with my other friend Denzel. Like, those times were something that I can't just put in a song. Like, it's bigger, right? So me talking to him about that, he was just like, okay, so if you didn't go to school to make music, what are you going to do? And I told him that my ultimate goal was to write a book, right? And now in this book, it was going to be about my brother and I's story. And I was going to also include those times of working temp job, being homeless, all of that, right? And what he said to me was, okay, this sounds like a good idea, but then what's your title going to be? Like, are you going to be an author? Are you going to be a producer? Are you going to be, what are you going to be? Right. And in my mind, I had not figured that out yet. I had not put the thought into what am I? Like, who am I? Right. So that's when the start of my Brunch Lovers Club in 2020, or at the end of 2020, this was like September, October-ish. I was with my friend Eva, and I told you guys about this before too. When we started the Brunch Lovers Club, that was due to my friend's passing, Asia Jackson. My friends at this time, we weren't necessarily hanging out like that. We had or some of us had just graduated from college. Some of us were starting our third, degrees and all of that stuff. People had children, getting married, all of that stuff. So we didn't have the time to sit around and kumbaya and all of that stuff. But after this pivotal death, this untimely death, I told myself I was going to be more intentional about my connections. I was going to be more intentional about reaching out to people, making sure people got home, got the resources that they needed. And I was being more vocal, right? I was stepping out of my comfort zone, because I am a person, I like to be an introvert. Being an introvert, it gives me that safe space to just be me, right? But at this time, I had to step outside of that. I had to do something in order to keep the connections going, to make sure that the Black women in my life were safe, right? And this was something that I could have done before, but it was just like the timing was bad, right? I wasn't in that space to reach out to people before, but at this time, I was like, I felt like I was in a better position, right? Even though I didn't necessarily have a home to go home to, I didn't necessarily have a car, I didn't have all the things that, people view as you're good, right? Whatever that means. So I reached out to my people. Some responded, some didn't. And we were able to go out. We were able to continue making sure that we were good, right? We were building that connection, right? And in this part of it, it was just about staying in touch, right? It was just about going out to, you know, catch up, eat some good food, go home. And for me, that was enough, right? I didn't have to be around people all day. I didn't have to gossip about, who did what to who and all of that. Like, I just wanted people to have that safe space to be themselves, right? And that's still what we are doing to this day, right? So 5 years of me being around my friends, being around new people, right? Because we have, expanded the brunch lovers since then, and I'm glad about that. But in that as well, we lost some people along the way. And this is a part of the rebrand as well, right? When you are going through your own personal identity rebrand, not just business, identity rebrand, there are going to be people who can't go along. There are going to be people who support you from afar, right? Or they may not support you at all, right? But you still have to wish them well. And why I say that is because for me, in my journey, I've had times where I couldn't support those who I deem as my best friends. I couldn't be at the weddings. I couldn't go out to the baby showers or anything like that. I did go to a few, but I wasn't able to just support everybody in my season of struggling, right? But when it was my turn of, celebrating or, being in better positions, I understood that other people were going through certain things too, right? Some people was going through losses as well. And this is why I say you have to redefine the terms of gain and loss, right? Because some things aren't a loss, right? For real, for real. Some of these things you are gaining, in divine wisdom. It's all about you understanding that sometimes subtraction is really addition in disguise, right? So subtracting a few could help you gain more wisdom, gain more connections, gain deeper connections with people who see your purpose. They are working towards their own purpose and they are aligning those purposes to help the goal in connecting. And that is why when it came down to it, I didn't necessarily get upset about the people who couldn't come to all the brunches or if you couldn't support me, even with these episodes, because it's really not for those people, right? It's not for the people who have a lot going on and don't really listen to podcasts. I understand that a lot of people, they're tired of those podcasters. They're tired of seeing the clips and all of that. I would be too. But this is a part of the rebrand. And this is why I say everything that I do, the purpose behind it is first and foremost to glorify God, right? We are glorifying his name and what he has done for us, what he has provided for us, because I couldn't do it alone, right? I couldn't do it on my own. And for me, it was a time where I felt the most pressure on me as an individual. I felt pressure on my brother. I felt pressure on those around me who wanted to see us doing well, but they couldn't necessarily help us. They couldn't necessarily pick us up out of our pain. We had to do that ourselves. We had to heal ourselves. We had to go to therapy ourselves. And there were times where I felt like the therapy wasn't working, right? I was very, very weary of going to therapy only because I had to relive this stuff over again in my head. I had to relive this stuff. And there were times where I was just like, I wanted to end it all. Right. And I couldn't necessarily talk about that with people who didn't understand that mindset. Right. When you're in a tough situation, you can't just stop. Right. There's things that are going to continue to happen. Some of us know about it. Bills, life, death, all of this stuff is going to continue to happen to you. So this is why in those moments, I was so glad that I had somebody to call on. I had people who not only cared, but they pulled up, right? They were actually there to witness this struggle, this stuck feeling, and also the rebrand. So I'm thankful for that. But now, when we talk about this in 2025, I'm 5 years into doing these brunches. This is my first year of actually doing the thing that I wanted to do, that I said I was going to do 5 years ago. And I'm also studying to get my CDL. So this is why, in the grand scheme of things, had I done this 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I probably would have felt overwhelmed. I probably wouldn't have gone through it anyways because I wouldn't know what to do with myself. I probably would have stayed gone from Georgia. But God knew that I had unfinished business here. God knew that I had relationships with people who cared, that I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I lost them. So, in all of that, this rebrand, Before Da Phame, Brunch Lovers, that is my gift to not only myself, but those around me who are looking to rebrand themselves or actively rebranding themselves. You felt stuck before. You felt like you didn't have a set of people to support you. This is me saying that I support you. This is me saying that I love you. This is me saying that whatever you're going through right now is not going to defeat you. But you have to be the one to say that to yourself. You have to be the one to go up and say, I'm going to do the work. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to allow God to provide all of my needs. And I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to be the one who complains if I have to get up at 5 a.m, 4 a.m, 3 a.m, whatever time that you get up for work. I'm not going to complain. I'm going to get up. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go home and I'm going to start it over, because sometimes that's all you got to do. That's all the rebrand is, right? Let it go of your old ways, letting go of the smoking, the drinking, the games that people play, because that's what I had to do, right? I let go of all of the stuff that I was known for, the cars, the clothes, the shoes, all of those things, even the girls, right? I had to let go of these things because I didn't want that to be my identity, right? And now when people see me, they think that I'm a preacher. They think that I want to be someone's pastor or anything like that. And the truth of the matter is, I don't, right? I have this in me, and I know that if I allow myself to be that light to someone else, then maybe they can make that change, right? Maybe they can start their rebrand. Maybe they can stop feeling stuck. And that's all it is, right? If I had somebody like me back when I was in those times of feeling stuck, then it would have turned out much, much better. But that's enough for you guys today. This is the 40th episode. I wanted to make sure that I got a good amount of content. This is enough, right? I feel like it's enough. But just in case it's not enough for you guys, there are 39 other episodes for you to go back and listen to. This is your host, Jordan, and this is Before Da Phame. Thank you for listening.